Welcome all to another episode of the Guiding Light podcast. I'm Chris, and here, as I've been every other episode, with my good friend Benny Boy over here.
Hi all, and thank you for introducing me, Chris.
It was a good introduction, that, wasn't it? Yeah, I thought so. And I'm also joined, along with Ben, by Matt. How are you doing today, Matt?
I am doing great.
Good stuff.
Nice to see you guys. This is very professional, this setup. So I'm very impressed with,
Thank you.
The only thing that's missing is like tea and coffee.
Yes,
Just, I think that would be a nice touch. But
next time. That's for you to sort.
I will sort that, Chris.
Fantastic. Thank you for the feedback, Matt.
Yeah, no
Appreciate
worries.
that every time.
No, I thought we'd get out of the way first.
It's the best thing to do. You should ask before we start recording next time, man. Let's wrap this one up fast, right? Let's go then. We've known each other a few years now, which is great. I got to know you when I started kind of talking about my gambling addiction and stuff like that. Obviously, I started the All Bets Are Off podcast with Ryan and Kishan and Kelly back then, and then Tracy got involved and did loads and loads of really good stuff. And then I got to know you personally, but also through Gamban, and just various things that you have done in the past. So we talk about all sorts on this show, anything you like mental health wise, recovery wise. So I think maybe let listeners who maybe haven't heard from you before, let them know a little bit about who you are.
Sure, yeah. So I was a gambling addict when I was 16 to 20 years old. I had an addiction to fixed odds betting terminals, and then in recovery, I obviously finished my degree and started working in politics for an MP. And then after that, I wanted to campaign for gambling reform, and particularly against the machines, because I thought there was a big problem with them. Obviously, you used to be able to gamble £100 every 20 seconds in the bookies on these machines, and it was roulette, and it was very quick. And I got addicted to them very quickly, and I saw lots of things when I was gambling in those shops that suggested to me there was a big problem with them, and I started campaigning for local councils to have more powers to restrict new premises opening, and then off the back of that appeared on a Channel 4 Dispatches documentary called Britain's High Street Gamble, which in which I talked about my addiction, and then I appeared on Sky News talking about this select committee inquiry that had recommended more machines in betting shops, and obviously opposing that. And then off the back of that, I was contacted by a guy called Derek Webb, who's a philanthropist and who wanted to run a campaign against the fixed odds betting terminals, and he'd already started doing a bit of work. And I met him and basically said, I've got a little bit of political experience, I've got some connections, I'd really like to dedicate myself to this a bit more. And this was back in 2012. And we tried, he said, I'm obviously willing to give you a go, and we made quite a bit of progress quite quickly. Obviously, we weren't aware of like how much resistance we would come up against from the betting industry, from government, from what I call the gambling establishment, so the Gambling Commission at the time, and what was the Responsible Gambling Trust, and everything seemed to be sort of co-opted by the gambling industry to some extent. So breaking that down over very many years and getting the media on side, and then ultimately getting the review of fixed odds betting terminals in 2016 after Theresa May took over as Prime Minister, because it was getting blocked by David Cameron until that point. I then went to work for Jeremy Corbyn. I was his spokesperson for a year, and then after that I returned to the campaign on fixed odds betting terminals. We got that decision to reduce the stake to £2 a spin, which is what we'd been campaigning for. We got that decision in 2018, and that was enacted in 2019. And since then, I've been campaigning for reform to online gambling, and that's culminated in the recent government white paper, which included things like stake limits for online slots and the statutory levy and the ombudsman and affordability checks, or financial risk checks as they're calling them now. So I'd say like pretty big steps forward. And in the meantime, I've co-founded Gamban, which is blocking software that people can download onto their devices to block gambling sites and apps. And that's, doing pretty good. I mean, it's free through the National Gambling Helpline, and we're now available for free in Norway, Finland, Ohio, and hopefully a few other jurisdictions very soon. So that's certainly the thing that, since the white paper, that I've sort of been focused on primarily, Gamban and getting that getting the adoption of that, internationally, sort of more recognised and emulating what we've done in the UK. And I think, blocking software is now seen as a sort of key component of someone's recovery journey. Like when someone presents for treatment or wants to self-exclude, like blocking the sites and apps on their devices is sort of seen as a rite of passage, or part of the things that you would do to restrict access. So very pleased with how that's gone. That's basically a whistle-stop tour of everything I've done.
No, that's great, mate. That's great, and thanks so much for sharing that, because I think it's so interesting, that there are different ways that people recover and all that kind of stuff. And I love the way you took on a challenge, you know what I mean? Like a proper challenge. And it took a very, very long time, as you say, to get from that starting place, like 2012, to when the law was enacted up in 2019, wasn't it? And what's interesting is, I think when you started all that in 2012, I probably was only just starting to gamble at that point. And I had finished my gambling period. I was in recovery, in GA rooms, talking about the reduction of the betting terminals from £100 a spin to £2 a spin. So I think that's incredible. I had all that pain in those years that you were campaigning, and and thanks for doing that. Thank you so much. And I think it's really important. And it was a step in the right direction. And it's an interesting one, because, like you then said, you've moved on to trying to think about all the other stuff with online gambling. As we know, it's a huge issue. And lots of people have said, because I've heard it, lots of people went from fixed odd betting terminals to online. And then I guess that's something that you must hear a lot. But for me, it's all part of a journey, or part of a process. How I guess, do you feel about that? And what kind of questions have you had on that, and what do you say back to say, this is where we're trying to get to against a very difficult industry?
Yeah, exactly. I think it's there's always more that you can do, and to get anything is really difficult. Like, to understand like how the government and the British state functions, it's there to support the interests of like capital of corporate vested interests, right? And one of those is the gambling industry, and therefore to do anything that, or to get the government to do anything that is like against their commercial interests, is like a massive win. So it's not like we have this kind of range of options that we can choose to get those reforms that we can choose and sort of like pick and mix, and we're choosing these. It's like, what is winnable? What can we actually get? And from there, that's then a springboard to getting other things. So I'll give you an example. The levy for me was the biggest thing in the review, because what you're going to get is a properly funded treatment system that's NHS administered. You're going to get independent research program that is informing government policy, and that's going to be substantial. And you're going to get prevention campaigns that I think are going to be much more robust, because they're not reliant on industry funding or like voluntary funding. So all of these things taken together, I think, will lead to more reforms in the future. Like the things we couldn't get, like advertising restrictions, because I think of all, like not just the gambling industry, but also like the sports leagues and broadcasters that were lobbying against that. When we get the independent research that shows that this is obviously causing significant harm, that will make it very difficult for government to not act, but it's about creating. I mentioned before this kind of gambling establishment. It's about creating an independent ecosystem that can thrive without the kind of voluntary support of the gambling industry. I'm not saying that things haven't been able to do so. I say Gamban has been able to survive in the system as it is, but I believe that, you know, just because Gamban's been able to navigate that system, that doesn't mean it's a good system. Yeah, a good system would be one where, you know, you can, if you're providing a service and it's a, you know, very good service, or you want to do a piece of research that is not necessarily in the interests of the gambling industry, or might find things that will make them a little bit uncomfortable, you should be able to do that. There should be the provisions there to do that. You should be able to get access to data in order to conduct that research. It shouldn't just be like this kind of, you know, gentleman's agreement, for want of a better phrase, between the person in receipt of the funding and the gambling operator. And I think that a progressive gambling industry, which I believe it can be, I believe, you know, even if it has to get dragged kicking and screaming to the point where it's a grown-up industry, a progressive gambling industry should be able to tolerate that. It should be able to tolerate findings that might make it a little bit uncomfortable. It shouldn't have this kind of really, I don't know, protective approach, which prevents like scrutiny or prevents anything like that might make it, I don't know, loss of control. I think that's the thing. They want anything that might mean that they can't control the narrative. It should be embracing all research and all findings, and really being honest about the fact that too much of its profits are coming from people with gambling problems, and that's not a good place for it to be. It needs to be in a much better place where, you know, it's 86% from 5%, 86% of revenues from 5% customers. It needs to be much lower than 86%, and it needs to be honest about that, and honest about, you know, the challenge of getting to that point.
I agree. That's totally the case that I believe as well. You know, things have to change, or it's just, you know, it's not sustainable this way. It's the wrong kind of. It's an unbelievable kind of structure that they have in place at the moment. You know, how can that business model work in the long term, unless you are pulling people like myself and yourself through a horrible journey, essentially, and kicking us out the other side. So it needs to change, and I'm sure, you know, continuing to have these discussions, these challenges, we'll get to a better place. And on the advertising bit, I'll mention this because obviously I work for Transport for London. I was sitting on the train the other day, and there was the casino advert, the 888 one, saying, you know, this carriage is your casino or something.
Yeah,
and I was
know.
like, whoa.
I don't know what they're thinking like with that though, because that's just like taking the mickey, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like that.
That was too much. That was a bad tone, and it's for organisations as well. This is the other bit I was going to get to. I think other organisations like mine to make a decision to say this actually isn't the right thing to do as well, and I hope that we can get there. But go on, mate.
It's trying to normalise it, isn't it? It's trying to try and normalise it. But that type of advert is only geared at one person and one person only. The problem gambler, right? You know, and I look at someone from the outside, you know, if you look at football, those adverts that come up saying the next goal scorer is advanced odds and it's like double what it would have been or whatever, that isn't geared at the person that does £3 on a Saturday on an accumulator and that's all he does, right? That's geared as to the person that's got a problem. Saying you're going to miss out if you don't bet now, and you've got to bet now. You've got to log onto your account now. You've got to deposit that, whatever it is, and you've got to bet now. Otherwise, you're going to take it. It's that sense of I'm not going to receive it, right?
Yeah, it's a FOMO marketing.
Yeah. It's just somebody who feels they're going to miss an opportunity. So it's no different to when I was at a roulette table waiting for my ball to come into a number and it wasn't happening, but needing to go to the toilet and not being able to go because that ball didn't come in. It's the same thing because they're going to take that opportunity away.
It's the same as like, you know, I was speaking to someone recently. Obviously we're alcoholics, and you know, it's a similar thing to the last order of a pub. I would go up to the bar when I knew it was 11:30 just before to get a drink because it's going to be removed from me. I've got to have that drink. I'm an alcoholic. I've got to get that next double or whatever I'm drinking, and that's exactly what that advert's doing. But if they'd done that with booze or drugs, there'd be absolutely outcry. but because it's gambling, it's seen as it's all right. Do you get what I mean?
There's a
and that's the stuff that
tone
gets
to
to
it.
me.
There's a different tone, and there needs to be the right kind of messaging, which is stuff that's being discussed right now as well, isn't it? Around some of the advertising and that, what it should look like, what it shouldn't look like, and including that public health messaging, and actually for companies to not just put something at the bottom that says. Take time to think. It kills me that. Take time to think and look at Gamble Aware. That's it.
The take time to think thing is really interesting to me because you mentioned alcohol as like a kind of comparison, and obviously they're two different things, and people say, well, is gambling more like drugs? Is it more like alcohol? Is it more like tobacco? Obviously it's its own thing, right?
Yeah.
But we can use alcohol as a kind of benchmark, and we can say that, okay, if you want to promote this idea of responsible gambling, what is responsible consumption of gambling? How many bets a week is a safe amount?
Units a week? 14 units a week.
Exactly.
Average,
So I don't agree with this whole it's all on the individual and this kind of responsibilization and traducing gambling harm to just individual responsibility. Because if you look at all the things the gambling industry does, not just the marketing, but the direct marketing, the profiling, the products, everything is optimized to get you to gamble more, right? So it's not just about the individual, but if we take the gambling industry's framing of responsible gambling and we say, well, actually, okay, what is responsible then? And the gambling industry might say, well, don't gamble what you can't afford to lose. Well, that's a bit like saying, don't drink to get drunk, right? Yeah. That's not the point. The point is, what is a safe level of consumption? Now, I think if we actually drew that out of the gambling industry and the government, and we said, okay, let's say it's don't exceed 5 bets a week, or don't exceed 5 bets a month, probably, right? Then where does that leave slots, and where does that leave online casino products, and where does that leave bet and play, right? So then you start to think, well, hold on a minute. If we want people to gamble responsibly, quote unquote, or we want the consumption of gambling to be responsible, then have we got the right products? Are we offering the right products? And we're not, right? We're not. So
I think it's important. I read there was a couple of things that stood out for me in the white paper, right? The amount that someone can gamble before getting a check, right? I worked out is 85% of what the average wage is a year in this country. That's without actually paying for rent or food. That's they're taking their whole gross salary before tax and 85%. So it actually worked out, if you take tax and national insurance off, I could gamble today more than the average man before I'm getting a check, that I find abhorrent. Yeah, and the other thing that I pulled out in there was the think for 25 was compulsory, right? Because I looked into the stats in the white paper analysis and the last alcohol awareness campaign, more under 18s are gambling today than using alcohol. But they find it acceptable as alcohol, that it's Think 25 challenge, and there's a huge fine in Tesco's. But the gambling industry in that white paper says it's voluntarily, and it's only £1,000 fine if they get caught. Right? If Tesco's get caught, it's a massive fine, and they lose their license to trade alcohol that costs them millions and millions of pounds a year. Right? So I look at that from the outside, going, well, how is that fair? Why are you saying me as an alcoholic is more important than the gambler? Because you're trying to protect me more than the gambler, in my opinion. This is all my opinion. I can't get my head around those statistics. I just cannot. If you look at the in the white paper, the under 13s, it's incredible the amount of people that have gambled in the last 12 months, but they haven't even touched alcohol.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, that's where the problem lies.
Yeah, for sure.
But for me, it's become socially acceptable with the train. Yeah, like casino. Yeah, we're normalising it to the young. You know, the other thing is, like, my daughter's in at the moment with games where you buy like chests for like money, and you get like rewards or advance features or whatever.
Transactions now that are going on, it's just feeding the mind, feeding that dopamine hit. Me with my ADHD, I'll get all that stuff, you know, whether it be food, whether it be games, whether it be gambling, and gambling's where I kind of found it, and all those quick hits are what quietens my head down, I think, very much like my medication does in a good way now. But it's just driving behaviours and driving a brain to work in a certain way.
And also, I'm not against gambling industry. Like, there's a place for it, right? If you can, same as alcohol, if you can be that 2 pints a person or that 2 bets a week, that one accumulator, whatever, and get a little bit of fun, and then you're not over, it doesn't ruin your life, yeah. Then I find that okay. What I find really tough is when we're not looking after that percentage of people that struggle, and that's really what I see from gambling. There was a review on alcohol very recently, and it's been put in Scotland already, about the minimum amount of price per unit of alcohol, right? So they can't go below a value now through alcohol, because they understand that there's an issue with that, right? Now there's arguments that, well, that means people will just go and rob to buy a different alcohol, whatever. And there's always that argument. But at least they're trying something, right?
Yeah, exactly.
They've highlighted there's a problem. They've done the analysis. They're now putting something in place, and they will review that, and hopefully it works. And if it don't, they'll pivot.
But also doing that, they recognise what the challenge is as well and what the risk is, and then they can mitigate that risk as well. So it's not like we do something and that's the final scenario, everything's going to be better. It's about, this is a step in the right direction. What is the outcome of this potentially? Some people might be better off, some people might not. And then what do we do about that? And that's how these things have to work.
There's a difference between unintended consequences and unanticipated consequences. Like, there's things that can happen as a result of you doing something that is on aggregate a good thing that you can exactly mitigate against. Like, this doesn't mean you shouldn't do it. When we were chatting before this started, guys, you were mentioning about the impact of the meds that you're on, and like how it's making you feel like you're able to slow down and enjoy the process, enjoy the moment, a bit more mindful, a bit more kind of not feeling like I've got to get this done, and I've got to get this done, and then you get there, and then there's more things to do, and you're never really settled, right? And I wonder whether, a lot of the mechanics of like gambling products are like geared towards that outlook. It's like you're always trying to get to the next level. And I was playing GTA Online last week, and as I was playing it, I was thinking, this is just geared up for, like, you can never win this game. This is just the kind of, you are constantly trying to get to the next level, and for what? You can never complete the game. And it's a bit like those mobile games, where like you're constantly basically 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 4 steps back, 5 steps back, and then 10 steps forward, and then it's like you're trying to progress, but you feel like you're kind of against the tide all the time. And I just feel like that has so many similarities with what you described about it's like recreating it in microcosm, in this kind of like environment where it's like gamified. You're gamifying your own
our feelings,
mental
and our
illness,
life, and how we're working, and that is how life felt for me. So much before I started having meds, so much was happening, and my head wanted to keep going and doing the next thing, but not enjoying the process of getting there. Just, oh shit, there's a task, got to have that done, got to have that done, or there's one over there, oh Christ, oh there's another one over here, I've got to do it, but I'm never going to complete it. So I think, like, with the games and stuff as well, and anything, whether it be a gambling product, a game, all designed by people to keep you continuing to play, aren't they? And there's no kind of end, like you say. When I think of gambling, there are so many harms that come from gambling, whether they be reputational, whether they be relationship, whether they be your mental health, whether they be the finance bit. And I think this is the part that sometimes people focus on so much, that finance bit. So you think, oh, gambling's an issue, or somewhere else where you're spending money, which could be trading or stuff like that, like day trading type thing. But actually, if you've got a head like mine and you find gaming as a way instead, but gaming where you're not spending money, but you can still lose all that other stuff. Your mental health can still go bad. And, you can lose relationships and all that. And it's not to say that gaming actually can't be quite a healthy way of doing stuff as well. But it's about understanding how much and when you need to stop off.
But the thing I'm really interested in is, do you think that gambling created that in you, or do you think that was always there? Or do you think it exacerbated it?
I think it enhanced it.
So
I think it was already there through neurodiverse, and I think what happened is it enhances the reward mechanism in the brain. So I've had some scans recently through the Priory through going through this process, and what's actually happened is it changes the pathway, and because I recept reward differently because of ADHD, gambling, using drugs, sex is different for me, because of the way that I already accept reward. And what I was going to say really early on is this started for me when we had the first phone with Snake, because you can never complete Snake,
Yeah,
right? It set off the world of pain we're in now, because you can never complete it. You're always searching for the next one, right? And what happens is when you take a drink or a drug or a bet or sex, right, in my case, that first time I do it, I'll never recapture it, right? And then I'll live in disappointment for the rest of my life, because I never get that reward back, because I'm never going to be able to complete it. And that is exactly what I've experienced, right? Yeah. And I've just speaking to a lot of addicts, gambling addicts, sex addiction people, they all say that similar thing. You know, they're always living in a rush to get a high that they never can do, so the risks get bigger. You know, because they can't experience what they experience. You know, I was talking to a sex addict the other day, right? And like the risk that he's taken around that to get his rush is huge now. It's not just having affairs anymore. You know, drugs. You know, I went from taking small dosages to a £1,500 a habit to try to recapture that stuff. And I see it a lot with gambling, and that's where
it's staking up, isn't it? It's like it's more frequent, it's bigger bets, and that's it, and that's where you get desensitized to the money, the amount you're spending.
I don't think it's even the money though, is it?
Well, what I was going to say on that bit was coming off the back of what you said. So when I started gambling, obviously, I was about 30 when I started, really, and I didn't know then that I was looking, and I still didn't know until after I finished gambling, but I was looking for this hit all the time.
Yeah.
I didn't know it because I didn't know about the ADHD, and what I did was I suddenly found something which was giving me what I needed, but without having known that I needed it. So it wasn't the healthy way to get it, but it was a way I'd found something. It's like, oh my God. But then through that process, they started to realise it because they have the data on how I'm betting and kept pulling me in for more and more. So like Ben said, my brain was rewiring, but also I needed these hits. And what you'd really hope is, you know, if you saw this kind of stuff, you think, well, this person, this is where the research bit comes in, totally independent stuff, and saying we maybe could learn something from this. If someone gambles in this way, what may that mean with regards to them and their, you know, are they neurodivergent, for example, you know, and that should be available. And for me, that's what happened. It got so desensitized, but do you know what? It got to the place where I didn't want to do it. I was bored of doing it. I hated it. I couldn't stop because it was still giving me something, even though I hated every moment of it.
But I think that's why that campaign for me about think, right? Because people like me and you, when we've got ADHD and it's given us a drug, it's given us that hit that we need. It's not that we can put it down. We need it. That's why we're doing it, right? We ain't thinking because of where we are. So just take time to think. It's gone past that, right?
Yeah. It's not it. Exactly. It's a bit like saying to people who are already 3 or 4 beers in, don't drink drive. Yes. Like, it's like really what you need to say to people is before they leave the house is leave your car at home.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? That's the thing. It's you're sort of saying the message is coming at the wrong time.
Yeah.
So I think when we, because obviously we've been on Big Step together. I think when we were talking last time, it was a few years ago now. I think I remember going over Tower Bridge, and I don't know if you'd started on the meds then, but I remember talking to you about me because I take sertraline and I've been taking it since 2016, and I had quit gambling in 2010, so I'd already had quit gambling for that 6 years till I realised I need something. And I don't remember ever having crippling anxiety or feeling very depressed or having ups and downs to the extent that I had after I'd quit gambling, like before I started. I don't remember that. I mean, maybe I did. Maybe I did have some underlying mental health issues. I genuinely don't think I did. I think the gambling caused or exacerbated what was there. And then while I was gambling, I had like the difficult thing was stopping. That's when all the mental health problems came.
Yeah.
It wasn't while I was gambling. The gambling was like keeping me
Yeah.
in suspended animation almost, right? Like,
Mhm.
and then the 6 years after, I really struggled. I have to be
Yeah.
honest, I did really struggle to just like for my mind to reset. The money wasn't an issue really. I paid back the debts I had, and I was fine. After a few years, it was the just trying to, I don't know, cope with all of the anxiety and all of the, I don't know, just I was in a very bad way. But anyway, sertraline really helped, and I've been on that now for bloody hell 8 years. So I'd like to come off it one day, but I've definitely been more productive, happier, calmer. You know, so I've achieved a lot in the last 8 years because of it, I think.
I think we like it rewires us as humans, I think. And when we take it away, that drug of choice or whatever, and I use gambling is a drug for me because it releases a drug, a chemical for me. So it's not necessarily the point of gambling; it's what it does to my body when I gamble, right?
Totally.
So I think for me, like it rewires us, and when we take that away, it's like a come down. Like people have crack. You know, if I smoke crack today, that was my drug of choice, I'll go for 4 days, right? And the come down will be crippling, and then I'll want to die. Like, I'll come down, I'll eventually will get some sleep. But if I then don't do crack again for quite a period of time, and Chris has seen me through my clean time, I want to die, and I don't want to live, and I get depressed, and I don't want to eat, and I don't want to get out of bed, and all that stuff, right? Because I'm on a come down, because I'm on a physical withdrawal from a drug, and that's what gambling is, right? Because it releases that sensitivity, it releases that endorphins in your brain, it releases some other chemicals, and then what happens is you have a come down when you stop, and your body says, where the is my stuff? Like, I need it, it's a necessity, I need it, give it to me, and when you don't give it to him, you've got a problem. In my experience, like that's what I see from a lot of people.
Yeah,
you've just described it there.
It was really kind of weird time because you think I've quit gambling, so I've got rid of the thing that was doing all this harm to me. So why do I feel like this? And it was difficult for me to understand at the time. But looking back, it's much easier to have that analysis where clearly I'd done a lot of damage to myself in that time. Like I'd done a lot of damage to my brain and my body, and you know, a lot of things weren't as they were supposed to be, and it just takes a lot of time for your brain to recover, like to those neural pathways to rewire, and it didn't really, and it hasn't until I started on the meds.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and like it's really good that we talk about this stuff to understand it, because this is all the harms that people feel afterwards. This is all the legacy stuff, and this is why prevention is so important at the outset, to try and stop people being here. That's, you know, so much focus needs to be on prevention. I strongly believe that.
Yeah.
But when people have been through stuff like us and our family members and all that kind of stuff, you know, the harm is huge because it isn't just us, it is the people around us.
Yeah.
And for me, that is a massive thing that is never discussed enough. You know, the amount of people who are harmed is massive, and it's, you know, I get bored of hearing about the small percentage of people, because it's it's not true. It isn't true.
It's a ripple effect, isn't it?
Totally. But going back to that medication bit, like trying to come off the meds at some point, that's absolutely the right thing to consider, isn't it? But it's about doing it in the right way and with your GP and all that, and kind of now that we're in these positions in our life, making those right choices, talking about it together, all that kind of stuff, which we didn't do in the past probably.
No.
We worried, kept it internal. Talking about it, we can make choices to go and, you know, talk to a GP or speak to a parent or whatever the case may be.
I mean, I heard in a room recently, someone had multiple years off of gambling and alcohol and wanting to die. And I spoke to him afterwards, and I was like, yeah. And he said, well, when I was gambling, I didn't want to die. I said, yeah, because you were getting your hit. Now you're left with yourself, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
you can't escape, right?
That's it.
And it's sort of a realisation, like the damage he's done, right? You know, and look, he's still in recovery, and he's getting the help, and he's got put on meds himself now, you know, and touch wood, one day at a time he's going to stay clean. But I think that's when I see, for me, like what the illness does. And I say the illness as a disease of addiction because it can play out in other ways. If you look at the tree of addiction, there's multiple things, right? But it's so important when you take that away. You want to diet, and I'm doing some analysis at the moment because I suffer with an eating disorder, and there's so many correlation between gambling and eating disorders. It's uncanny.
Really?
It's a process addiction. Yeah. It's about endorphin, a rush. It's the naughtiness. It's the risks. So, for example, an eating disorder is around risk of your life. How much can I not eat? What's the bare minimum I can get away with for still living? Yeah. It's all numbers based. How many calories I've eaten today? Yeah, how much exercise do I need to do tomorrow to over it because I've overeaten today? Yeah, all that stuff. There is such a massive link between it, and I'm going through something now where I'm trying to get two bodies to hopefully talk from both sides. But it was very interesting that I stumbled across that because it is so unique. It's a process.
Because they say it's an addiction, isn't it? An eating disorder. That's what they I think people have described it as similar to an addiction.
They're classing it as a mental illness now that's an addiction.
Yeah.
Because and the addiction side of it, I mean, we've done episode 2 that's particularly around eating disorders, and it's such a process-driven disorder, eating disorder, and it's the same. Speaking of gamblers, they have the same sort of thought process. It may slightly vary because of the things that you're doing, or you might be a casino man, or a horse betting man, or a binger, or an anorexia, but actually the core basis is such a similar correlation. And it was just something that I come across, and it was all numbers based.
Interesting.
And that says to me about, could a lot of eating disorders be gamblers? Could a lot of gamblers have an eating disorder? Like, do you know what I mean? Are we all just neurodiverse and it plays out in different ways? Like, there's such a wide scope.
Yeah, no, totally. And that's why it's very difficult to look at these things in isolation, which is so often what is kind of done, isn't it? Or, you'll go to somewhere to get some treatment and you'll get treated for one thing. Once it's exposed that maybe there's something else, so how do we deal with this individual? But we are all individuals, we're all unique, and we do have this stuff that cuts across. And you're talking about the eating, I mean, I can't believe I didn't have a clue about my kind of eating issues all those years. But as soon as I wasn't drinking and gambling, although I was doing lots of things to try and make myself feel better, and I was doing good stuff, I was talking to people, engaging, making changes in my life, I was binging.
Yeah.
And I didn't see it. Didn't see it until I went to a health professional about a weight loss program. I said, you can't do this type of program because you're a binge eater. How do I not know that? I mean, like you said, when we did that walk about 3 years ago, I was about 6 stone heavier or something.
Yeah,
so
I know, you lost a lot of weight.
Yeah, and a lot of that was through medication.
In fact, speaking of which, we need to update the pictures that we have of you for Talk Ban Stop.
We do.
So, in fact, if anyone wants to see Chris's transformation, the Talk Ban Stop is a good. That's when we started in 2020. That wasn't so long ago.
We're going to put it on our socials now.
Yeah, no, we are, and actually,
we should. That's good. It's a really good before and after.
Yeah, no, totally.
It's amazing.
That was something I wanted to bring up next, actually, because we've gone off on all sorts of stuff here. But obviously, we need to talk about Gamban and stuff. And one of the things you mentioned earlier about it being part of like a recovery, and I think it's really important that certainly for me when I came into recovery, and it's still important these days, all this stuff. But when I first got in, I needed to do certain things, which was make sure there was no easy way of gambling. There's always ways to find if I really, really want to. But to put something like Gamban on my phone, that's great. To go to GamStop and sign up there, that's great because I can't go to any UK-based online casinos. It's a really good thing, using Moses, all this kind of stuff.
Yeah, the banks do the transaction blocks now as well, which is great. We're trying to get them to do a bit more. It's...
Do you want to talk about that, actually?
Yeah.
So the bank thing's really important, actually, because I don't know if you want to talk about it a little bit more, but my daughter's now got a bank account, and on my app, because you can see multiple users, you can switch them on and off, right? And that's a fairly unique feature because I don't think it's been around long, is it?
No, it's relatively new, and a lot of the banks are doing it now. I think most like big banks have a gambling block, and they're doing it well. So if you want to switch it off, there's a calling off period. Monzo's is excellent. It's like you can set it, I think, to a year, I think now, or even maybe longer. So I think that's all moving in the right direction. But I think the the important thing to bear in mind is if you're trying to quit gambling, do as much as you can to make it difficult for your future self to act on an urge to gamble, right?
Yeah.
We're living in an environment now, or a society now, where we're carrying devices with us everywhere that are internet enabled, that mean that if you want to decide to gamble, the action is very, very easy. And if you can put some friction between decision and action, you give yourself a bit of breathing space, or you can actually, not act on that urge, because you're going to get the urge to gamble. So if you can, do the blocking software, obviously, I'm going to say Gamban is the best because it's mine. If you can do the self-exclusion with GamStop, if you can do the transaction block, do as much as you can in that moment where you want to take positive action, and then you're going to give yourself that breathing space. And then if you want to get treatment, or if you want to call the National Gambling Helpline, or if you want to whatever, talk to a family or whatever, it's much easier to do that once you have a bit of peace of mind. I think, and you think, I'm not gonna, okay, I've made that decision, I've made that first step. And from my perspective, I don't want people to be Gamban users forever. I would like them to recover from addiction, and and a bit like dating apps, you don't want to, ideally, if your dating app is good, then you won't have a user forever, right? Because they'll meet someone. So if your blocking software is effective, then and as part of a recovery journey, then that person will recover, and there won't be a Gamban user forever. So that's the idea, and you might say, well, I think you'll always need something like Gamban. Unfortunately, I think there'll always be gambling addiction. But I am doing, I've devoted a lot of time and effort to trying to get regulations that will minimise gambling addiction, or at least prevent, the worst excesses of it. And so I'm just trying to come at it from both angles. And
I think you're right as well, because so much harm is preventable, and that's what needs to be addressed. How can we prevent this harm, which is preventable? But people will become addicted to stuff. That's the thing. So we need to address that as well. But I like what you say about the coming in using Gamban and not being a Gamban user for life, unless somebody wants to be, because it works for them, which is absolutely cool. But that friction part, that putting all those things in place, is there to help and be part of it. And then I would say, then find out who you are, learn about how you want to potentially change to become that person you need to be. Because for me, those things are important, but then it's about, who am I? How do I become what I want to be, so I don't want to do this stuff again? And that's a really important bit. So that isn't recovery, that is a thing to put in the place recovery. To enable your recovery. Exactly.
That's it. And recovery is the thing. That's what we want to facilitate that as best we can, which is the next step. Within the app, and we've added a few new features. We're going to add a lot more very soon, and we're trying to. We've got about 75,000 active users at the moment. We're trying to learn as much as we can from people that use the Gamban, and it's very much user led. But also, we want to make it free at the point of need in as many avenues as possible. So ideally, at the point of self-exclusion, or when someone presents for treatment.
I think it's important what you said there around, some people say the horse bolted when you're gambling, and for me it's about getting that time. So by putting and doing it all, so they're all steps that make it harder to gamble, right? Now reality is, I could gamble today. If I've done all that, I could still gamble if I really wanted to. I can have a drink today, even though I'm an alcoholic, right? I've still got that in me. It's about having the mechanisms to either make it harder and give me time to think. That's the real time to think message, actually.
That's it.
Rather than think when you're actually gambling, it's like put the line in the sand, give me some breathing space, that 48 hours, 3 days, week, whatever it is, right? To then, do the casino banning, do the Gamban, do whatever it is, right? Tell your family, right? Whatever it is, because I think that's important. For me, it's also a very secretive illness, gambling addiction, the same as an eating disorder. The very secretive illnesses. Not a lot of people will know that you're a gambling addict or you've got an eating disorder. Either you've lost too much weight and you're in hospital, right? Or someone checks your bank account, or you're, got bailiffs on the door. You can hide it pretty well up to that point, right? Your family don't necessarily know what's going on until it's at disaster moment. I'm getting evicted from my house, or I want to die, or I'm in hospital for an eating disorder. Oh, we've got a problem there. Sometimes that sadly is too late. Sometimes people don't get that, they commit suicide. They don't get there, they don't get that second chance. And that's a sad thing about this illness. Like we was discussing before, for me, you can see an alcoholic. Do you know what I mean? It gets loads of interventions. In my experience, many alcoholics have had loads of interventions before they die. It's still sad that many, many people die way too young, and it's an horrific illness. But they get a lot of preventative early because people get to see it. Yeah, if I went and drank 20 pints a day, and I fell over in the street, someone will come up and say, "Oh, you're all right." The medics will turn up. I'll probably get some form of help. I'll probably get a leaflet in the hospital and try to help me out, right? You don't really get that with eating and gambling.
No, and I had that with alcohol, and it wasn't on purpose. It came out of something else. This is the point about like physical health and stuff. I went for I think it was kidney stones or something they thought I might have. I did the old scan, and 2 weeks later I get a phone call to say, "Oh, you've got a liver like that of an alcoholic." I was like, "Oh, really? Can't believe that." Like, I'm not even drinking at the moment, which I wasn't, because I was pretending to myself and to everybody around me that I wasn't an alcoholic, and I knew I would be drinking again within a number of weeks. However, as soon as I got off that train, I started drinking, because at that point I thought, oh, my life, if they're telling me this now, this is only going to get worse, but I can't bear to stop right now. But I can't think of a situation where I'd go into a hospital or somewhere and, for something physical, where they would pick up a gambling addiction. And that's quite incredible.
I think there's a massive educational piece for me, saying that I'm starting a charity, saying that I want to campaign on some gambling stuff and some eating disorder stuff, but around GP education as well. You raised a really good point there. Like I went to the GP in my using, and I got issues with my lungs. I got diagnosed with COPD. That is potentially a terminal illness if I use drugs again. But it's treatable, and I repair to a level where I can have a normal life, right? But there's a period of time, like you said with your brain, at 6 years, there's a period of time that I had to go through to rehabilitate. But he wouldn't know if I'm a gambling addict, would he?
No.
He'd have absolutely zero clue.
Well, the screening element is something that will come in as a result of the levy, and as I understand it, the NICE guidelines, which are the clinical kind of guidelines for treating gambling addiction, and GP training is all going to be part of that. So that's good. But you're right, it's not something that can be picked up unless it's volunteered or unless the right questions being asked.
Which
this goes back to what we were saying before about what's a safe level of consumption. Like if you ask someone, if you did the kind of PGSI screen, like which is the questions you get asked to see if you're a gambling addict, but depending on like what number you score on that screening is like how likely you are to be addicted. It might just be better to like simplify that and just say like, how many bets do you place a week? How much do you deposit into a gambling account a week? Like surely these questions are an indicator of harm, aren't they? Like consumption is probably is correlated to how much harm you're experiencing. So I don't know.
I would like a saying that I thought long and hard about is I would like a percentage of the average UK wage per month, a low percentage, and if you have to go above that, you get a call or a text, or you have to communicate back. So, like for example, the average wage in the UK is just under £3,000 gross. So, say for example, it was 1%, it'd be £30. So you could bet £30 a week comfortably, and that's okay. And if as soon as you place a bet or deposit more than that, it will decline it, and you will need an interaction with the operator or someone else, right? Because my argument is, if you're spending £30 in a cost of living crisis that we're in, and you're not a multi-millionaire and you're just a normal working, it's a lot of money. It's £120 a month, right?
Exactly, and that's exactly what we are. We asked for 100 as the threshold, and the gambling industry obviously went mad about it and said this is nanny state and all this sort of stuff. But it's not saying you can only gamble £100. It's saying that if you are going to gamble more than that, then because of where the averages are in terms of income and disposable income, and the fact that the cost of living and all that sort of stuff, that's only going to impact 10% of gamblers. 10% who would gamble more than £100 a month, right? So of that 10%, let's be generous and say half can afford to do that. What about the other half? They can't afford to do it.
Yeah.
So you need to detect those people, and the best way of detecting those people is not all this kind of markers of harm algorithms. It's just the money that goes into the accounts.
Yeah.
Right. Maybe frequency of deposits. Maybe if people are loss chasing, and all that sort of stuff. That's a reasonable one. But like, I don't care about how they're gambling. The thing, what kind of bets they're placing and all that sort of stuff as being kind of determining markers of harm. What I care about is how much money that they are losing, and if they're losing more than they can afford, that's a problem for them and their families. So the fact that the industry would resist this, would resist the regulations that would standardise proper checks that take place.
The question of how much
says it all.
The question of how much you can afford to lose is really interesting.
Yeah.
Because if you ask somebody who wants to gamble and they have this much available each week, which is available, and they haven't got to put it on bills, they've paid all their bills and they've got £100 a week to spend, right? That's cool. Ask their child who wants to go on holiday in the summer, that £100 might actually be £20 because they want to go on holiday. And this is where that affordability thing comes in. But more than affordability, this is where all the other harms are sitting behind it.
Yeah.
The family, the children, all that. And these things are really hard to pick up, of course. And £100 is too much for some. And
definitely, but it goes back to this, like it's the fact that when people are gambling and they're in that frame of mind, it's like having a few beers and then expecting them to make the same decision as they would when they were sober. So that's the thing. It's like, it's not a rational decision. If you're chasing losses, you've been there, I've been there, you've been there.
Yeah.
You're not thinking rationally. Your cognitive functions are completely distorted.
And also, there's a couple of things that I wanted to pick up there, right? Is how do you define an alcoholic? So I've been going through some work. Now, I define my alcoholism as if I drink more than I set out to, I'm an alcoholic because I've gone over a line. So if I set out, and I'm a raving alcoholic, there is no denial I win that, right? But the amount of times I sold myself the dream, I'm going out with my mates and I'm having 2 beers, and 3 days later I come home, right? I've overstepped a line, I'm an alcoholic. Because my mates could say to their wife they're going out for 2 beers and they'll be home at 8 o'clock, and they went out for 2 beers and they were home, right? So if you say as a gambler, I'm going to spend £20 this week, and you spend £30, you've crossed the line that you said you wouldn't have been. You're spending more than you set out to. To me, that's a problem, right? The other thing that I looked at the white paper with is that I think they set the limit at £500 a week rather than 100. There's a 500 thing in there, if I remember rightly. But my point is, I worked out there's 117 online betting facilities in the UK. Technically, websites. I know that you've got a lot more because you've got the Gamband stands, but like the normal ones, not the blacklisted ones, and like where you get counts, right? So that technically is £500,000 a year I can gamble.
Well, exactly. This is why you need a single customer view, and this is what we said. Like, there needs to be an understanding of how much someone's losing across the regulated sector, right? Like on aggregate or net, and it's there's a way, I believe, and then this might be slightly utopian, but like I believe there's a way of designing gambling regulation that minimises harm, that gets the tax that will address the harms as well.
Yeah.
And that gives as much economic benefit to the country as possible. And we're not doing any of those things at the moment. Like, now we'll see how it goes with the implementation of the white paper and how much of an impact that makes. But for me, it's online gambling particularly is something that, unless you're going to regulate it properly, you might as well ban it. Like, that's the kind of thing. Like, it's like saying we'll legalize drugs, but we won't regulate consumption or supply. And a bit like what they've done in some states in America with marijuana, right? Like, I think the arguments were, well, if we legalize it, it will drive down consumption, it will kick out the crime, and they've done none of those things. They've just like supplemented it.
So I'll give you an example why that's so powerful, what you just said there around regulation and you might as well not do it. So some addicts go onto a script. So if you're a heroin user, what they'll do is they'll try and get you off of heroin, and they'll go on what is a prescribed script, right? And the idea behind that is they will stabilise you out, and then they'll start reducing you off that to to the end is that you will then come off of that and you will be drug free and you'll be on a process. Now that does take some process for a heroin user, and there's a view that you're still using drugs, but there's a solution, right? Like you're weaning someone off and you're giving a stable and you're taking away the risks because you're medicating them and you're bringing them down. That stuff there, you're not doing that. Do you know what I mean? You're not. You just got unregulation. To spend £500,000 a year, if I really wanted to, on it's insane. Like I don't know anyone in my friendship circle that's got an £500,000 spare cash, right, to spend. Yeah. I actually don't know anyone who earns $500,000 a year. So
it's meaningless.
It's meaningless. Like for me, right? And I'm not anti-gambling, right? Because I had a couple of mates that went to the Cheltenham. And they gamble once a year, right? And they saved up a couple of £100 and they went and they had a few beers and they had a good night out. They all got dressed up in suits and all that kind of stuff. But they won't gamble for the next 6 months. And it doesn't mean
exactly.
And that's cool, right?
And this is your moving the barrier, isn't it? So this is where I think that industry's tools are actually useful if there was like a single view. So you couldn't keep changing everything. Because actually, I think if you're a sensible person who thinks, I've never gambled before, but I only want to spend this much gambling, so I might as well put a limit on it, £30 or whatever it might be for a month. Why wouldn't you? Because that's what you do when you go shopping or your budget and all that. It's like you're budgeting, but we don't do that. But as soon as you start moving that from £30 to 40 to 50, that's the question mark, isn't it? And then, oh my crikey, I've opened a second one because that one's set at 30. There's another one, but that's not policed as such. But and that's why you need that single view. But that's when I think there is that issue around the addiction. But also why I think there is merit to the tools as well. Yeah. But it's about telling people to use them before it's too late.
It's almost like in politics, like sometimes you get cross-party amendments, or you'll get petitions that both parties will sign up for. Or if we're going to war, most people will it'll be a cross-party coalition, right? There needs to be some form of that. Like, and I'll give you an example. Most debit cards will do you £100 contactless before it asks for a chip and PIN. Why? Because it needs to regulate that it's you, right? So that means I can do 7 shops, or I could do it all in one. But as soon as I get to £101, it asks me to put my PIN in to regulate it's me, right? For protection. So, I believe the tools, like the reasonable gambling tools, they are sensible, right? My mate's got one on, but he does £10 on a Saturday, right? That's it. He does football bet, £10, and he's got no desire to lose over that, but it's there for a protection if he goes a bit mad.
Yeah,
but you open up another account.
It's preventative, isn't it? Like these are the thing about the tools, and if they are effective, if they're done in an effective way, is that they should prevent someone getting to the point where they're lost chasing. Once you're lost chasing, then you are kind of you're in a spiral or a negative cycle, and that compounds the harm. So like. But if you're already addicted, limit setting is not going to be effective, is it? No. Because you're always going to find a way around it. So so this is where, if you are addicted already, you should stop. Like self-exclusion, gambling, whatever what we talked about. That's the only remedy for that. But this is the thing. Like we have always said that if you can get the regulations right to prevent harm, people won't get addicted. They won't lose all the money they have and have access to. The industry won't be, as you described it, dragging people through this dreadful experience and spitting them out the other side. It will cultivate long-term relationships with their customers, which won't be conducive to harm, or as much harm as the industry is currently causing for its commercial model. And the gambling industry, particularly the listed operators, the ones that trade on the stock market, public companies, big multinationals now, they should be embracing that business model of low spend, high customer, high regulation, big compliance costs that shuts out all the nefarious actors and the little operators that just want to get acquired and they're unscrupulous and whatever. Shut them all out and operate in a way that has the consent of the public. And that's what they should be doing. They should be looking long term. So it's very disappointing when they're lobbying against some of these things, because I think it's in their long-term interest, because all it will take is one populist government to come in and go, like what's happening in the Netherlands at the moment. I mean, they're not saying ban it, but they've put the tax up to 37%. They're starting to clamp down on gambling. It just takes one populist government in Britain to just go, we're going to ban it, because the public is against it, it's causing harm, and we disagree with it. They have to get their act together. They have to embrace reform.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
I'm totally aligned. I was reading I'm looking at some charity stuff at the moment, and a big charity in the UK has just got a petition up, and I've seen a 600% since COVID increase in calls for gambling related harm to their suicide prevention phone line, right? And they've had that charity, so it's a suicide prevention charity in the UK, has petitioned because they have got the data, right? What was really interesting, and you talk about reform and the big players, and I'm all for that, because you can't see. So if you go on one of the big operators' annual statement, because they all have to release them because they're on the stock exchange, you cannot find the data of how many underage that they stopped or how many Think 25s that they acted. There's no data there. When Tesco's do that, and they have to declare how many people they stopped, how many mystery shops they had, how many times they regulated whatever regulations, knives, alcohol, tobacco, whatever it is, right? Because they're regulated, right? Rightly so, by the way. You cannot find in any listed company, gambling company in the UK, where that data is freely available, right? Why? And now I have my head, because of the way I am, says to me, if they're not willing to declare it, it probably isn't getting done, because if they were doing it and they were regulating it enough, why wouldn't you just declare it?
Yeah.
That's my viewpoint. Now, I could be totally wrong, but that's what I look at when I look at the annual statements, right?
Because that's an opportunity. Look at us, look how we're doing. This is our opportunity to be the ones to embrace that new model, as you say, and really get there and get the long-term custom. You show off what you're doing.
They haven't even got select committees. So, for example, the question I had is, how many listed gambling companies have got advisory board people to their board that come from gambling-related harm? Well, there's none.
No.
Well, why is that? Because, no disrespect, if you haven't got a gambling problem, there's no point in talking about reducing gambling harm, because you do not understand. You need to talk to the people that have the problem. You know, and I'm not saying the extreme ones that say gambling should be banned from the UK permanently, because I'm not in that camp, because I think that there's a mediation between the two. I think that gambling can exist in the UK, but it just needs a lot more regulation, in my opinion. But it's about getting that expertise in a controlled way, and saying, look, these people have got a problem and they've come out the other side and they understand, but these are the 3, 4, 5, whatever things that they're saying, if you did, would prevent. Now, you're never going to stop gambling addiction. It's just not. You're not going to stop alcoholism, right? But 80% or whatever the percentage is, like, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely out of control, and that's the stuff that I would like to see come in. How many people? When you go to like Ascot and Cheltenham and you get your thing. My mate showed me, so he goes on. He's not got a gambling problem, bless him. He'd done £12 in the 2-day event. His mate spent more on beer, right? I think the hot dog was a tenner, So, like, he spent £12. He's a tight ass, basically, is what he said to me. He said, I don't like spending my money. Fair enough, right? But you sign up on the email, and you get your ticket, and you do all this, and and they send a welcome email through. There weren't one gambling message about responsible gambling on that email. So you're going to an event and there's not one. Now, I booked up something at the O2 recently, a comedy show, and on the back of it said drink responsibly, and the national AA helpline, because I'm going to an event that's got alcohol, right? Now, if I'm an alcoholic, I probably ain't ringing that, but it's there. It's something, yeah. There's no thing in that booking that says there is help. If you're booking this and you've got a problem, these are the places.
Racing always seems to have this kind of mentality that there's a bit of exceptionalism about them. You know, it's not part of the gambling industry really. You know, there's I mean, we could do a whole other episode on this, but they kind of, the way that they've gone about the review has been very interesting. For years and years, they've been basically used by the gambling industry as their kind of acceptable veneer, where they will use their kind of lobbying clout and their influence in Parliament and in government to water down reforms or to resist any changes to regulation, not least with affordability checks. You know, that's certainly been, you know, the impact on racing has certainly been salient with government, you know. But racing has not made any effort to delineate itself from online slots and online roulette. And the cross-selling from racing, betting on racing to those products is absolutely endemic in the industry.
Yeah.
So if racing doesn't want to be considered part of the broader gambling industry, it needs to extricate itself from this business model, which is deriving more than 50% of its revenues from online slots and casino, and a significant proportion from football betting. So like racing is actually a very small part of the gambling industry, but the way that how vocal the racing lobby is, and particularly in the debate around gambling regulation, you would never know that. You would think that racing was like the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But what was really important from the British Racing Association is they lobbied about the stakes, the checks. They actually had a petition.
Yeah,
back.
they did. That's right.
I read it up. They actually had the biggest petition for anti-reduce.
That's it.
Right. So that says to me that they know there's a problem, right? If they're fighting for their business model, that's a fight to save their business model.
I think it's recognition that it's interesting dynamics. Basically, they've been weaponized by the gambling industry to resist affordability checks.
Yeah.
And I mean, if you could argue that if they're really worried about affordability checks, then clearly a lot of their customers are gambling more than they can afford. Their argument against it was, if you require people to provide information, then they're not going to gamble, which is that's not borne out by the evidence at all. People are very willing to provide information, you know, where it's been tested, as we do in all walks of life. Whenever we're applying for a credit card, if we're trying to get a loan, or if we're whatever it is, we're very happy to provide that information. So if you're going to gamble a lot of money, that's sort of part, you know, it's a cash transaction. It's pretty standard procedure. They already have to do it anyway for anti-money laundering purposes. So.
Well, that's exactly what I was just about to say. Yes.
I was speaking to someone on that. When I go to the doctors and they're asking how many alcohol, I'm not putting the right thing down, right? Also, I spoke to someone that's had an affordability check, not got a problem. They'd done 2 big bets and it flashed up 20 grand plus in like that, right? And they had no problem giving their detail. He's a wealthy guy, right? He wanted to do a big golf bet recently. They he just sent his shit over.
Yeah.
He's like, have it. I don't care. I ain't got a problem. There's my statements. That's my earnings. That's my company I own. Like, I want to place 2 bets, right?
Yeah. Maybe the drop-offs are people that are actually money laundering. I don't know if they've ever occurred to them that maybe the regulation is working as they're supposed to. Sorry.
So, yeah, that's for me. Like, if someone's not doing a check, they probably know they've got a problem or they're dodgy, right? In my opinion, right? You know.
I like your opinion.
It's probably right, yeah? Do you know what I mean?
Good stuff. What I've got to say right now is, though, Matt, thank you so much for coming along today.
Oh, my pleasure. It's been great.
Really good. We've spoken about so much more than just the mental health type stuff that I thought we were going to talk about, but hey-ho, that's brilliant. And obviously met you through gambling, and gambling harm and changing regulation and all sorts of stuff we've tried to do. So it's really, really good. I totally agree with you on the... and you, can't remember which one you said it, on the medical practice, training and things like that. You obviously mentioned the NICE guidelines. And I mean, one of the things we've done at Gambling Harm UK, I don't even talk about Gambling Harm UK on this podcast, but it is to do with lived experience and education of students who are going through to become doctors. And that's so important. We've done it with affected others as well as gamblers, and it's about asking those right questions. And one of the things is that people often don't turn up to say, by the way, I've got difficulty gambling, these are the things, and then it's trying to help those doctors bring out what that connection might be. And I hope there's much more of that in the future.
Definitely.
But thank you, Matt.
So thank you for watching the latest episode of podcast. Thank you for coming in today, Matt.
Pleasure.
Thank you, Chris, for my co-host. We will have the links underneath the show for Gamban and Gambling UK Harm.
Talk Ban Stop.
And Talk Ban Stop. So if you have
Chris's picture.
If you have got a problem, please reach out and they can signpost you or help you. And do give us a follow on Instagram and Twitter under the Guiding Light Podcast. See you next time.
See you later.
As we wrap up another amazing and inspiring episode of The Guiding Light, remember, although your journey is unique, you most certainly are not alone. If you have any questions or topics you'd like us to explore, reach out please across our socials or via our website www.theguidinglight.co.uk. Until next time, take care of yourself.